Planning Commission. Let's do a roll call. Alec Mosley.
Here.
Greg Maloof possibly will be here shortly. Dan Sargent.
Here.
Dan Brown.
Here.
Ed Provo.
Here.
Katie Trahan.
Here.
All right. Does everybody have a chance to review the minutes, previous minutes from May? Any cleanup issues we might have?
If none, motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those for?
Aye.
All against? Motion carried. Jonathan, any staff community updates?
Yeah, so the one thing I did have, I think the mayor had sent to all you guys, and I want to print this off in subregs. I know currently the board mayor aldermen are looking to do development review fees. I think there was a first draft ordinance, and Grant,
Is this a,
yes, Grant had sent me that ordinance because he had concerns about conflicting language with the subdivision regulations and zoning ordinance. Right there is that I gave to you guys. It's the pre-application procedures for major subdivisions, and that is the first conflict that I would see there. Is because if you notice at the end of the first paragraph, it says no fee shall be charged for the pre-application review, and no formal application shall be required. If you guys start doing things for pre-submittal, so I think the idea is that, if people are starting to want to ask questions but are not wanting to spend, 10, 15,000, whatever on a site plan because they don't want to get that stage yet, you want to be able to still charge because they're asking questions of the town engineer who's a contract, he charges by the hour. So I think they're trying to recoup those fees, which I don't think there's an issue with that. I think the main point is that we want to make sure there's not, confusion by a developer who's going to look at the subreg and say, well, the pre-application portion is not supposed to be, it clearly states there's no fee. And then I'll go ahead and give you guys these aldermen here. There, and I didn't print enough for everybody. But
That's all right, we can share this one.
yeah, so the idea, I think, is want to make sure that, I don't think have an issue with board mayor aldermen are doing, but want to make sure that there's no conflicting language when somebody's looking at the subdivision regulations, zoning ordinance, trying to figure out, well, you guys are saying I have to pay for this, but this says I don't have to pay for anything. So I want to make sure what exactly are you guys wanting to, what is the purpose of this ordinance that you guys are passing, and then, what step is that in terms of like subdivisions and site plan procedures. And I wanted to open up that, and I think the mayor was also supposed to be here so he could give a little more. He was in Chattanooga last week.
is there a remedy? Is there?
I think one of the things we could do is change that language, remove that language from the pre-application, and also, if and when this ordinance is passed, putting language in the zoning ordinance and subregs referencing it, so that way a developer can know exactly, I need to go here. I think the other thing that was concerned is, how exactly, to what degree in that informal process that a developer is looking at. If the developer is just looking and asking questions and say, well, now before I answer any questions, you got to pay a fee. I mean, that may be difficult to sell. I guess it depends on what stage of that pre-application, I guess, is a developer what are we looking at in there? Because I think it's difficult. So they start hey, this is just the very bare bones of I'm just starting to investigate this development.
Well, we've been blamed for being very cumbersome when it comes to dealing with developers, so I wouldn't think we're going to do anything to complicate the issue, or whether it be time or money. So, I mean, we're just getting cold with the charging part of it.
I don't think there's necessarily an issue with the charging in terms of some of these, issues. Whenever especially with town engineer, you're paying town engineer, by the hour, and so he's charging every time he gets questions, about water and sewer. He's charging the town of Mont Eagle, and the town of Mont Eagle is not getting reimbursed for this. there's no reimbursement process for this.
The first, as I understand the first paragraph, it doesn't mention having the right to consult with the town engineer anyway. It talks about the staff planner, town reporter, or a designated member of the planning commission. Now, assuming you're the staff planner, if someone seeks advice from you, does the town get a bill for your time?
We have a contract, so I don't charge, Cindy does not charge by the hour. There's a flat fee every month, or I think we do it by a tier basis, but we don't do hourly. So if I'm working 30 hours, work 50 hours, whatever, it's not charged by the hour. But I believe the town engineer is.
It seems to me that if a developer in a pre-application process causes the town to get a bill from somebody, that ought to be the developer's responsibility. But it doesn't sound like any of the people named here are going to submit bills.
Well, I think the issue that I Grant.
I'm the idiot that brought this up. Dean's the one who called me the idiot. But
I did not.
so the problem I had with the ordinance that got put in front of us, I don't know why it didn't go to you all for a review as well, but it had language in there. It talked about I can't remember the exact verbiage, but it was a pre-site review. And I'm looking in the Planning Commission ordinances, there was no such thing using the same language. So what we were trying to do is get the language to match each other so that this is basically for when a developer comes and says, okay, I need to get utilities to look at my stuff to make sure that I've got the utilities that I'm going to need and what I'm going to have to do on my own site to match up with the utilities. That gets sent over to Travis Wilson, who has to put a review, which causes us money. So we were trying to just outline exactly what was going to be the criteria for the first submission versus a site plan submission, a more formal site plan submission versus a final plat submission. So we were just trying to match up the language, and maybe the preliminary, the very first step of that, I think, was where it was the language was off the most. So really what we're trying to do is just reconcile the language so that we know exactly when a developer needs to submit any kind of fee to cover engineering costs that may be the initial engineer saying, nope, there's no utilities to that, so here's what would have to be done, or you need to match up to our utilities by doing this. That's the engineering that we were talking about, and that seems to need to happen prior to a site plan submission to you all, if I'm understanding this correctly. So we were trying to capture that first, prior to a site plan being submitted to you, we're trying to recapture our costs from that first bit. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and I would add to that, because I think I spoke about this last time. I think the major concern from the development, or at least the development that's going on right now, is the lack of reliable information. I don't think anyone has any problems paying a fee if you can deliver a reliable information from engineering. For example, Mr. Wilson sends back the amount of dwelling units that were able to access this particular sewer line based on its capacity. I mean, that is that's pretty typical of any development. You know that before you do anything. Now, it's different when you're using soils for septic systems. That's governed by TDEC. The power stuff would be known pretty quickly. You call Sequatchie Valley, they're going to be able to tell you. But it's primarily concerning water and sewer, and those seem to be the reoccurring issues with any development. And so, I think we're more than happy. I'm more than happy, speaking for myself, to pay a fee as long as I get in writing, here is the sewer access, these are the improvements that would or would not have to be made in a timely manner. Because that's the other issue I've seen with Mr. Wilson is it's 60, 90, 180 days before we get an answer on some of this stuff. And some of that's depending on how diligent you are in this process. But I think that should be something that happens quickly if we're going to be charging a fee for it.
And a simple checklist, I think, would probably solve a lot of the problems. So the first submission that that are talked about in our ordinance, if we had a little 5 bullets or something that's a checklist that says, here's what's required for us to be able to do this preliminary review for you. And then the next one would be, okay, you're going to submit your site plan, which I think we already have a checklist in our ordinance for what needs to be required in a site plan. And then identifying then when would be the final fee for the final plat or final site plan submission, whatever. I think just a couple of bullet checklists would probably, and the correct language, and it's really just a couple of words that were mismatched, I think would probably solve the problem and solve some of the confusion. Sorry, Dean. go ahead.
Dave?
One example about this is the Planning Commission had approved a site plan subject to signatures, and I think all the signatures were signed with the exception of Montevideo Utility. And the utility, John Condra would not sign off on it until the engineer told him that the water was adequate for the water. And upon consulting with the engineer says, no, it's not. Well, if John had went ahead and signed that after, I mean, you guys didn't know that, and then John had signed it, and then I think that opens up a liability for the city then to be potentially having to rectify that deficiency on the water at whatever cost. And that's probably an extreme example, but that has already happened.
That lack of information.
Yeah, and there was a lack of communication amongst the utility folks on that. The city takes some responsibility, but that's a good example.
One thing that we had talked about, and so hope maybe, and that may be something we want to put in the ordinance, is addressing where in the pre-submittal process, where you have the developer, the town engineer, and the staff planner all together. We all go over everything. We look at it from the zoning perspective, we look from an engineering perspective, we look at it so that all these questions are answered, because if there's a back and forth process where something gets lost, or I'm waiting for the engineer to send something like that, or the developer is waiting for me to send something, or that way, and maybe whether it's meeting at town hall or whether it's doing via Zoom, whatever process where all three of us are in the same room or conference or whatever, so we all know exactly and prevent those situations. And that could be part of that pre-submittal process, is that they have something, the developer has something concrete, not necessarily a site plan or a plat where they've done all the engineering and everything, but they know what they want to install, and that way the engineer can look, say, hey, that's going to need a 6-inch water line, or that's going to need a sewer, the sewer capacity is unable to provide for that, so you're going to have that on septic. So that way all those questions can be answered. And that may be something we're fleshing out the pre-submittal process early on, so that way by the time we get to the final review, everything's done. We're just making sure all of the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and that everything that should have been done is being done. We
just need to be very clear. So when a developer walks in the door with this check for pre-site review, whatever it is, he knows exactly what he needs to be bringing to the table, not just the check, but the other things, so that engineering can look at what utilities
it needs to be. I think that's a situation where it needs to be enough. Doesn't necessarily have to be a fully fleshed out site plan with engineering and everything done, because quite frankly, he may not even know. Like, it may not be, his engineer may put a 4-inch line and he needs a 6-inch line. So that's where that pre-submittal process would solve all those things. So that way his engineer is not having to do multiple reviews. But there needs to be something enough that I can see and the engineer can see what exactly you're wanting to do here. So that way when you proceed to your final site plan or your final plat or your engineered plat, we know what's happened. We know what's going to be there, and there's no and ifs or buts.
Maybe it's not that things need to be removed from this table of contents, because nothing changes. This says nothing about engineering.
Yeah, and that
may just be we need to add a couple of sentences to say that an engineering review fee or an engineering review may be required or will
require for major subdivisions, and
before the utility signatures on any plats. If you have concerns about utility something, get a utility consulting fee.
I would say setting up that process where we can have all three of us, the developer, the engineer, and staff planning together, so that way we all know, it answers everything from the zoning, planning, engineering, and then any development questions the developer has.
Well, you could have a situation where someone's just wanting to buy a tract of property to speculate on, and they would not even go through the planning commission. They would just contact the city and ask about the sewage capacity and the water capacity for that tract of land and see what the regulations are before they want to invest their money in
And I guess
that.
that's the question is if there's ask, I mean, I think in towns that actually do these fees, I think really all of them have in-house engineers. So they're not a contract hourly base, they're their own town engineer. I think that's where Mont Eagle's running into the issue where you're not paying, I don't know what, you're getting billed by the hour, whatever your hourly bills, which is different than if he was a salaried employee of the town. And that's where it becomes difficult to, it's not already bought into the fee. Like that's not the expectations that any questions you answer are already there. Like you just answer the simple questions. He's charging even for the simple questions about sewer capacity, which is part of whatever your contract is with that. But I think that's where that becomes the difficulty there. I think if it's not, I would say that's the very, very early stages. Somebody's just asking questions, because when somebody asks me zoning questions, I don't send a bill to the town of Mont Eagle because we have a contract. That's just a flat fee for everything, and for I think it's a 2-year contract. It's flat fee. That's all we. And so, I get a lot of questions every week, and sometimes multiple times a day. And so it's different for the town engineer. What I understand, that's the issue that you guys are running into.
Jonathan, do we give the developers a roadmap on who to contact? I have no problem with no fee, but we need to
I think
send
that's
them
where
to
we
the
need to
right
flesh that
person.
out and make sure that there's
I would say it's fairly unclear. It does say to consult with the
Right.
town, but it's very vague language. So it's like what actually, in practice, what happens is you talk to the utility manager and they say one thing and Mr. Wilson says another. And it's like, at some point, somebody has to take the authority or be the decision maker, and that needs to be clear in that language of who is providing. Because like I've
We
been,
need to clear
and
roadmap
I think
how to
that
start this process.
the major question from a developer is always going to be capacity and density. Does, like for example, R3 is supposed to be dense residential development. Do the existing utilities allow that? If so, what density could be achieved there? Now, and that can come down to specific questions of, do I need to improve the existing infrastructure, or what will the existing infrastructure actually support? And so those are the questions that I think warrant engineering.
I'm not sure what this has to do with the planning commission, truthfully. I mean, we're behind the scenes.
Is this the developer fee?
Huh?
Is that the developer fee?
And it looks like to me, y'all have had the conversation, so maybe it's something that we need
It's
to work
just
out at
something
the
that
same
will
time.
definitely, I think, to clarify and make sure there's no, confusion, I think it needs to be in the subregs and the zoning ordinance. That way, when the developer looks in, they're looking at the subdivision regulations. If they're doing a plat, which is subdivision of property, they know this is the process I have to do. If they're looking at the zoning ordinance for a site plan, they know this is the process what I have to do. So when they contact the town, they know there's going to be a fee associated. They know there's going to be a process that they have to, if they before they submit all their engineered plans, if they want to know all this stuff, this is who they need to talk to. And if they want to make sure everything is good in the pre-submittal process, I would think they need to have the town engineer, myself, and them all in a conference together, so we can all know what needs to be done, so that there's no dispute once they get to, because engineered plans are fairly expensive. That's why a lot of developers are going to ask those questions. But those questions are still getting charged by the town engineer, even the simple questions. I think that's where the town is having.
Mayor, I recognize you.
Thank you. I apologize to everyone for being late. I had another issue that came up. I asked Jonathan and Chad Reese last week when I was in Chattanooga to please review that and make comments, because there was some controversy between the ordinance that the mayor and aldermen were asked to consider versus some discrepancies with the existing ordinances and zoning laws. That's why I asked for this conversation. We're not going to take action tonight. We've heard some comments. Jonathan, I'll get in touch with you to clarify any cross-reference issues, and then it'll come to the mayor and aldermen, hopefully the end of June, to resolve this as a city ordinance. But there were certain zoning issues, and that's why I asked you to make comments. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
We got a question down here.
Richard, It does seem to me that with whatever they get written up in their ordinance, we need to, resolve in our regulations. And I'm a big fan of checklists that can make it very simple for developers and anyone else that wants to look.
We're just not in the fee setting
into-
business and that kind of stuff, so, I mean, it's not gonna come to us until it goes through Jonathan, so it looks like we need something that works. He's our watchdog, so whatever the rules are, he's gonna abide by whatever the rules are, so if we need to change ordinance, that's what the council's gonna do, right?
Right.
Right, but then we're gonna need to adopt
Right.
into the,
That's why I say, like, right now, they had their first reading. I think they'll have a second reading later this month. So we want to make.
The first, we'll have to do a first
Okay.
reading because of the changes.
Okay, so once we change the language and figure that out, and some of that language may still also have to be fine tweaked, because I think, we're gonna have to figure out exactly what the process is gonna look like, so it's not.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm a little uncomfortable with one statement here, and it reflects this single point of contact, that we're not going to charge a fee, which we shouldn't on a preliminary, but we're also sending them to the staff planner, who will charge us. And I don't think we need to direct the developer straight to the planner. I don't know if we want to go through the recorder, through Debbie, or how this gets parceled out to get him help. Is it going to be done by one of the members of the planning commission? And if so, who decides who that is and hooks them up?
I think, I know what, okay, so you're talking about the subregs. Yeah, I think this.
Jonathan's not gonna charge for that service. We have a
No.
flat fee, we have a flat contract fee with the planner. So in that instance, it does provide a good resource for the developer without any additional fees to the town or the.
So you think they're clear between Jonathan and Travis as who the planner is, if it's water and sewer issue, or if it's zoning or building regs issue, that they don't just reach out to Travis Wilson?
Well, I think that's what we're trying to figure out, is what the flow process is for
Exactly.
engineering
Yeah,
services.
I think
How
that's
do you go down this path?
Yeah, that's the thing is, I think we do want to make sure it's maybe not a situation that they don't go directly first to Travis, and then, they haven't even consulted in the zoning, and now the town's already been charged. There's not a process where they know that they have to pay.
Wouldn't the problem be solved if the language was added that says something like, if a pre-application review requested by a developer results in a charge to the town of a fee, the developer is responsible for paying?
That's a little open-ended.
I think, I would, first of all, I think you would want to reference the ordinance, whatever the fee schedule, so it's clear and thing.
If it's by the hour, you don't know the fee schedule.
Yeah.
It depends on how many hours the engineer spends.
Yeah, well, I don't know, I think it sounds like the way that they have their, I think you guys, I emailed all you guys what the ordinance that was sent, where I think they have initial deposit, and if it's more than that initial deposit, then the town can recoup that fee. Is that true?
Yes.
yes.
Exactly.
Hang on, we're getting a little bit deeper into this than really what the intention was. The intention was that the ordinance that we got presented said something about a pre-submittal review or some kind of language like that. And I was looking through the order, there is no pre-submittal thing according to our subdivision regulations and all. So I was just saying, okay, we need to use the same language that is currently in our subdivision regulations that says, here's the first thing that needs to be submitted. Here's the second thing that needs to be submitted. Here's the fee's going to be for the first one, and it needs to include these pieces here. This and that covers our engineering and stuff. So it was really more about making the language match than anything else. What this has grown into now is starting to think about, okay, what are the steps and the processes, and my opinion, what does a developer need to bring to the table at each of these 3 steps, and those 3 steps need to use the same wordage and verbiage that the subdivision regulations uses, because they were off. It was a language thing that started this whole problem, which should be a simple fix.
Let's move on. I think we beat this up. I don't know where we go next, but I'll let Jonathan give us direction here. Any properly presented old business today? sorry,
Yeah, I have a application for zoning change.
I got you next.
That's a new.
Okay, new business, zoning, tax map 107 FC parcel 30001-400 from residential 1/C1 mixed property to C2. I think there's a packet in here and part of the parcel map. Dean, this property is located right at the corner, you can tell us.
Corner, what I call going to Pelham 41 there, where you got, it's actually in 3 parcels, 3 different tracks.
And right now, part of it is
It's on West Main.
C,
Yeah, the front part, the frontage of it that it is there is C1, and then behind it, according to the map, behind it, the zoning cuts the property in 2, and then part of it is, I guess it's R1, whatever the Harkin family zone is there, in that area there. Whatever I put on the application, I think is what it is.
I have a question, Jonathan. The application says change to C2 from US 41 to Wren's Nest Road. And that Mr. Lay does not own all the tracks that we're talking about. So is this a request for zoning more than your 3
Well, I
tracks?
just brought that up so you would discuss it. I did contact Joe Lester of the Harkin family. They joined me on West College Street on that end. And I told him what I was doing, and he said, well, I didn't know. He said, if you can add me on there, if not, I'll sign whatever I need to sign. But anyway,
He'll need to make his own,
Yeah, okay.
his own thing. So it sounds like, and I think that's the question that we were having in terms of what this whole, because these are small parcels, that some of them are C1, some of them are R1. And then, you want to rezone to C2. And it sounds like the Harden family, which is the large acreage, that's right there, it's R1.
I think
Are also
like
wanting
40 acres.
40 acres, yeah, want to do C2, and that's a whole different.
No, they don't
process.
want all of it in the C2. They just want the portion that's there on West College Street.
Yeah, they'll need
they'll
to
have
do their
to
own
find-
application
Yeah, they'll
because
have
it's a
to
different
find
property
that
owner,
out.
and they need to clearly delineate whatever they want to actually be rezoned, because it'll be a portion of it, and we have to know exactly what exactly they're wanting. I'm quite sure I really have much in terms of a recommendation for here, because, obviously it is C1. I don't know exactly, I think there's been dispute exactly what is the central business district and how far it expands. The property across it is C2, now of course it's over the state highway. From what I can tell, that property is a single-family home, unless somebody else can shed light on that.
That might be the cemetery, I don't know.
It looks like there's a house in the middle. It's pretty wooded, and then there's a half in the aerial so I can see. I haven't driven to it, but that's what I saw. It looks like an 8-acre parcel, maybe bigger than that. But so I don't know necessarily that's a commercial, highway district that's going up toward Pelham. It doesn't look like that's really what it's being used for. But yeah, I mean.
Well, according to the map, it looks like whoever originally adopted that map considered the central business district to extend west to Wren's Nest Road.
Originally, it stopped at 41 years ago.
Whoever adopted that map.
Yeah, but yes.
Is what I said, and that.
Yeah,
as it
and you've
extended
got
Wren's Nest Road.
McDonald's in a C1 down there. When clearly, if you look at the definitions that Richard had brought up several times on C1, C2, and C3 interchange and all that, it's still as screwed up as it's ever been.
Well, I think the idea behind central business district is where you have, it's almost zero setbacks, requirements for C1, so it allows these small parcels to be created, so you could have foot traffic, you have plenty of foot traffic to go through there, and it wouldn't limit people in terms of what they could, how big they could make their building, because these are pretty small parcels right here, and all through the central business district, they're all pretty small parcels to serve that purpose. Is that, yeah, I really don't know in terms of, if we're starting to look at, I mean, it sounds like if Dean's doing it and then also the Hardens are starting at least a small portion, there's an indication that the US 41 going up toward Pelham is going to then become a new highway business district, because then other people can start, like the Hardens could presumably say, well, if Dean's rezoned and we rezone here, why not rezone the rest of our acreage? And I think I don't know if 41 is ever intended to be
Most of
that.
that is owned by the assembly now.
On the east side.
Yeah, on the east side, yeah. But on this side,
Okay, I got you.
it would all, or no, sorry, on this side right here, yeah, this would all be, so this one's Assembly, and then over here, I think is private property. This is the Hardin property. I don't know, they have not contacted me. I don't know what their rezoning is. I don't know how far they want to go their
Well, we
rezoning.
can just take that
Yeah,
out of
that's
the equation.
probably out of
Just
the
have a
equation.
conversation with.
What is the basic reason why this should be done?
I don't have a recommendation. I think right now I don't really necessarily have a recommendation either way. It's best use of the property. They're smaller parcels, which would be better use for C1, just based off of just what you can actually put on the property to meet the setback requirements. So if like Dean were ever to tear down any of his buildings, not saying he would, and if he had a C2, he would have much more stringent setback requirements that he would have
But
to adhere to.
but the issue of the development, O'Reilly offered to buy that property from me, to put a parts store on it. Okay? The parts store shouldn't be in a C1. And that's not even really the issue. My lots are divided or split. A portion of it is R1, and it's not big enough for me to build anything on. And then I'm limited on the C2, and there's some provision in there, I think you can elaborate on. If this happens, which one has precedent over the other? I think there's some language in the zoning or something there that addresses that situation.
Split parcels.
The difference between C1 and C2, I'm just going to read it real quick. Veterinary facilities, automotive fuel sales, automotive body shops, commercial, recreation, and leisure activities, golf courses, country clubs, flea markets, mobile home and RV sales, truck stops, no, I'm sorry. What's best for y'all? Vehicle sales and rental, wholesale sales, and self-storage facilities. So those are the items that aren't approved in C1 that are approved in C2. I mean, wouldn't it work if, I know we're talking more about the commercial piece, but the residential property is bordering a highway. I'm not sure why we're trying to change both. Why
It's
not
not
just,
big enough to build anything on.
why not just change the residential to C1?
Well, that's fine if that's what y'all decide to
I
do.
was
But
asking.
I'm directly across the street from the C2. And then if you look, the C1 goes all the way down to Renton Nest Road. And I think, personally, I think that should be changed, and that should be interchange zone.
Why?
Because it's an interchange there. If you read the definition that Richard read a couple of months ago, or what we actually need to do is have about 4 commercial zones.
Let me ask, Nate, do you have any input in the name of Imagine Money?
Well,
Have you defined
I was
the
going to
areas?
give an update, and in that update, I was going to ask all of y'all to be a part of a call on June 18th to discuss the downtown central business district. So, but what I don't want to derail this conversation, but that's the next place that the planners would like to go.
Should we define the limits of the,
So I had a call with them on Tuesday or yesterday in anticipation of this meeting, and this was my feeling, and I'll put it out to y'all as an order of operations. but we don't have to do it in this order. But the idea was to have them at the meeting on the 18th present what their ideas are for the central business district. Ask the question, is this what you think you want? If it is, then they would like to draft us some ordinance around that. And then once we know what it is, and we know what it looks like, then it seems like the question is, where do we want it comes later. If we talk about where we want the central business district to be without understanding really what that means, it seems like it's harder it could be harder to make a decision. So that's where they would like to go next. I don't know whether that needs to have any bearing on this particular question, but and I don't know if that's helpful or harmful, but we would like to do that on June the 18th in a Microsoft Teams digital meeting, and so I can talk more about that.
I understand that. I just thought
finish this.
there was some decision made as to the boundary of the downtown business district vis-a-vis, imagine, Mount Eagle.
It's just my gut. I mean, there's a lot of conversation about it, and my gut is until we have some in-depth conversation of what it actually means, it's going to be harder for us to define it. And I mean, I could be wrong. We could come up with that decision today if y'all have clear ideas, but we don't. Right now, our zoning ordinance has not activated the central business district. We've all had that conversation. We all know that. So let's figure out what we want in that central business district, and then let's figure out what the extent of that is what makes sense to me.
Well, I'm not opposed to deferring this till next month for y'all's consideration. That would allow that to happen if we.
Yeah, I think it would certainly give us some more clarity.
I'm not opposed to.
I would hate to pass on this and then you come up with something else, and I appreciate Mr. Lay's comment that if we could wait till after the 18th to decide, that might help us define our areas. Some people have said, well, you're right, different folks have different ideas of the downtown businesses. But I think for the sake of future planning, we need to decide that. Especially if we're doing this Imagine Mount Eagle project.
But not tonight.
But not tonight.
All right, you're proposing, you're okay to defer?
Yeah, I would request that.
Okay.
So yeah, if you guys want to do that, then somebody make a motion to table it.
Move to table this application.
Second,
I second.
Any conversation? All those for?
aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Lay.
Any other properly presented new business?
Well, I would like to give an update at
You already had your 2 minutes.
okay.
Go ahead.
If I might be allowed to speak a little more. All right. So, thank you, those of you who provided comments to both the zoning ordinance and the worksheets. I don't think we heard from everyone, so I took the liberty of printing paper copies of the PDF, and I would love to share them with those of you who weren't able to fill it out. I've printed out 2 documents. One is the summary of what was use by right in the 2016 ordinance that has changed to no longer use by right, which means it requires you guys' input so that you can review that. And then the PDF document that I heard from some people on, but I'd love to get more input on a list of items that they feel like if we have an ordinance that everybody agrees is well written, easy to understand, and easy to implement, then it would be easier for everybody involved if more of these things that we all agreed on could be used by right. And so the question is, going line by line, is this something where if it complied with all the regulations, could it be a use by right, or do you folks want to continue to review it? So I'd love to hand that out and then just ask you to leave it here. I'm actually trying to get up hay, so after this I'm going to get out of here, but I will come pick up the sheets tomorrow and get them to the planner. All right, great, thank you for that. So the other thing we talked about is sort of next step. So again, we got several comments on the zoning ordinance. My general feeling on their comments was I wish they had been more robust, but as I think I've talked about in the past, their scope of services is limited review of the whole ordinance, so I want to make sure that I'm pushing hard enough to get what we can get out of them without getting supplemental fees. So in our conversation yesterday, we talked about where the next steps are, and you know the bulk of their contract is to deal with the central business district and how to enliven the central business district and how to enliven some residential development, particularly in those adjacent areas. And so we think that's the next step. And again, so what we came up with, and this is all subject to, if somebody feels strongly that you want to do it in a different order, I'm all ears. But the idea was for a workshop, in a workshop meeting on June 18th, to have them present on the downtown and adjacent multifamily. They've given some high-level talks about some of the things they're talking about, and I know you guys have seen those in the presentations if you were here, but they want to drill down into some specifics and say, this is what we would like to present to you, and ask the question and get feedback. Is this what you want? And if we think at this level that in a general sense this is what they want to go ahead and draft some language for us to review and for us to work through as a planning commission, as a council, and as a community to get to the point where we have some language to adopt in the downtown and the adjacent residential areas. That's a process that's liable to take a couple of months. We took the liberty of scheduling this meeting for June the 18th because a lot of folks had some travel time scheduled, and we wanted to get something on the books sooner rather than later. This is probably something that, in a best case scenario, we've got some language to maybe think about it, if passing in a formal sense, maybe in August. So this is going to take a little while. But if we go through that process, and then once we're comfortable with the language, then we can figure out exactly where it goes. We can have that conversation, because that's going to be the next logical thing. If you have a new ordinance dealing with downtown and the adjacent multifamily, where does it end? Where does it stop? Where does it end? We will have to make that decision, both as planning commission, as a community, and as a council. Once we've gone through that process, this is our thinking yesterday in the call. Once we've all gone through that process, it may make it easier to then circle back and think back to the broader zoning ordinance. So he and Elizabeth gave some high-level recommendations. I suggested that maybe the next thing to do is look at C2 in particular. So if we can come to consensus on downtown and adjacent, then the next thing might be to look at that definition of C2. We know that the Imagine Monteagle document suggested some changes to add some residential component to it, to change a few things around. So if we can have success with downtown, then we move there, and then we see where we are in terms of contractual, what's left on the contract. But the idea is that we can actually begin to create some concrete change. Any questions on that? Any comments? Does it seem right? Does it seem wrong?
We're good.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So I'm going to send an email out to the Planning Commission and to the Council for this June 18th Teams meeting. I'll plan to set up in the conference room with the big screen, so that if you don't feel like you can interface with the technology, and this will be a formal workshop, so if the community wants to come, they can come and listen in on that format. But if you want to just call in from home, if that's easier, I think that's totally fine as well.
Do you have time?
4 o'clock. If that works for everybody.
4 o'clock your time?
Yes, 4 o'clock Central.
Thank you, Nate.
All right, so now I'm going to hand out some stuff here.
Homework.
Yeah. So if you haven't filled it out, here's your planning commission sheets, and I'm sorry, I've been working on a baler, so they've got some smudges on it. You already done it? You haven't done it yet.
I'd like to take a look at it if you don't mind.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Any other business to discuss tonight?
Mr. Fontaine was supposed to be here, but it looks like he's not, so.
Okay.
I'd like to ask to have something put on the agenda for next month to discuss how to just address those site plans when when there's signature blocks that nobody will sign?
Yes. One of the, and that's something I think the mayor and I have talked about. I don't know if everybody's aware, but Mont Eagle is a regional, it says municipal regional planning commission, which means that you don't just regulate within the limits, the city limits, Mont Eagle. You also regulate subdivision within your urban growth boundary, which Mont Eagle has a large urban growth boundary. I mean, it goes down here and goes up this way.
Is there a physical distance? Is it like 3 miles?
The state has maps on there, and I think our zoning map on our website, we try to take that parcel information and put it in there to the best of our ability. But one thing that, may look at is the town of Mont Eagle, a lot of cities that were regional planning commissions no longer exercise authority within their urban growth boundary because it's never going to be annexed, especially now that annexation by ordinance is outlawed by the state. I know in the last few years the state legislature has contemplated just eliminating urban growth boundaries in general, because the purpose of urban growth boundaries that was the limit you could annex, is that you have to annex within your urban growth boundary to prevent cities from competing with each other. So everybody has their own urban growth boundaries. But a lot of cities no longer exercise authority in terms of subdivision, and I think what's going to run an issue potentially in the future, if Bonnie continues doing that, is all it takes is maybe one person want to do a major subdivision, urban growth boundary, and then we start looking at who's going to take over those roads. Because if the county doesn't take over the roads and they're private roads, then how do you then regulate private roads that's outside your city limits that you're never going to have? I think that goes into, we have a lot of maybe some small splits where Grundy, if you're in Grundy proper in the county, they don't have subdivision regulations. I'm 95% sure they don't have building permits. So you can do what you want to divide your property. In Marion, they do have both of those. Well, I know they have subdivision regulations. So that may be something where if you maybe contemplate that may be the solution there. I think the mayor and I have talked about it. Perhaps you wouldn't abandon your urban growth boundary, but you may look at ordinance to stop regulating your urban growth boundary, especially since I think I don't think any of these properties will ever be annexed by the town of Mont Eagle. I mean, it may happen. I think it'd be unlikely, especially since bringing them in would be difficult, especially with no city property taxes. You're then obligated to provide city services, but there would be no way to pay for them additionally, since all of that would be residential property.
Katie, I know we spoke the other day about some issues with getting proper signatures. Has that process been improved?
Well, we figured out how to handle it the other day, but it is becoming more and more of an issue. So as there are minor subdivision splits or lot line adjustments in our urban growth boundaries, I'm signing more and more of those, and then roads won't sign, and so that signature block's on there, so that's an issue. And then like the other day, it was up in Cooley's Rift,
Yeah.
and there was an issue, but then also for roads, because those are private roads.
Right.
And so there's issues.
Yeah, sometimes they don't know what water service it comes from or who to sign on.
Right.
But y'all are working on that process?
Yes.
Okay,
I mean, we
good.
worked through that, and we figured out how to handle that in the future. If there's an issue, I'm signing and signing it. So, but it's not ideal.
Yeah, well, nothing is. Anything else from commissioners?
Move that we adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. We have a second. All those for? Aye. All opposed? Never got